We move on to our next session, which is Collaborative Translation, Creative Ways of Translating Together, sponsored by the Institute of Language Studies and Research. Allow me to introduce the panelists. We have Nirmalkanti Bhattacharjee, who taught English literature at GC College, Silchar, Guwahati University, and comparative literature at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He was Regional Secretary of Sahitya Academy's Eastern Regional Office at Kolkata and Director of the National Book Trust at New Delhi. Later, he also worked as the editor of Sahitya Academy's prestigious journal, Indian Literature, and as director of K.K. Birla Foundation, New Delhi. From 2013 to 2016, he worked as the editorial consultant of the multi-volume documentation project of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. An accomplished translator from Bengali into English and vice versa, his English translations of poetry and fictions of Rabindranath Tagore and Sunil Gangopadhyay, fictions of Mahasweta Devi, Manik Bandyopadhyay and Shinshendu Mukhopadhyay have all been very well received. He has also translated a Kannada short story collection of U.R. Ananthamurthy and a Marathi novel by Viswas Patil into Bengali in collaboration with the original authors. Recipient of the Best Translators Award from IBBY Congress at London in 2012, Mr. Bhattacharjee has also co-edited a collection of stories of displacement from Assam, Barbed Wire Fence, published by Niyogi Books, and 4 volumes of the Best Indian Literature, 1957 to 2007, published by the Sahitya Academy. The other panelist, V. Ramaswamy, is a non-fiction writer and translator based in Kolkata. As an activist working for the rights of the laboring poor, Ramaswamy has written about workers, squatters, slums, poverty, housing, and resettlement, and has been at the forefront of efforts to envision and initiate the rebuilding of a city from the grassroots. He has translated works by Shubhimal Mishra, Manoranjan Vyapari, Adhir Bishwash, Shahidul Zahir, Mashiul Alam, Shati Guho, Shahaduz Zama, and Ismail Darbesh. He was awarded the Translation Fellowship by the New India Foundation and the English Pen Presence Award in 2022. Our other panelist, Anindya Purakayastha, is professor at the School of Translation and Cultural Studies, ILSR, Kolkata. He was the 2021 Charles Wallace India Trust Translation Fellow of the British Centre for Literary Translation, University of East Anglia. Professor Purakayastha is the 2025 Visiting Fellow at the Centre for Research in Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences of the University of Cambridge and a visiting researcher at École Normale Supérieure, Paris. He is currently working with Lizelle Schwab to translate a book of poems of the Bengali poet Shankha Ghosh. The facilitator for this session is Dr. Nabanita Sengupta. She is Assistant Professor of English at Sarsona College, affiliated with the University of Calcutta. A distinguished scholar with a PhD from the University of Calcutta, she specializes in translation studies, 19th century women's writings, travel writing, post-colonial studies, gender studies, and disability studies. Dr. Sengupta has made significant contributions to literary scholarship and translation, including her acclaimed works, A Bengali Lady in England and Chambal Revisited. She has also co-edited important volumes such as Understanding Women's Experiences of Displacement and Female Narratives of Protest, both published by Routledge. Beyond academia, she plays an active role in Kolkata's literary and cultural circles as Assistant Secretary of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, Treasurer of the Kolkata Translators Forum, and a life member of ISC LALS. With a rich body of work and dedication to literature and culture, Dr. Sengupta continues to inspire readers, students, and scholars alike. I now hand it over to Dr. Sengupta for moderating the session. Thank you.
Very good afternoon to all of you. So I have been told at the very beginning that we are running very late in schedule. So what we initially had 45 minutes, and we still have that 45 minutes with us. So I was like, if we divide it into 15 minutes per panelist, I'm just laying it out at the beginning so that there's no confusion. So can we have one round of 7 minutes and then another round of 8 minutes per panelist maybe? So that way we can have the discussion flow. So, well, after this small bit of housekeeping, this session is primarily about collaborative translation, and I personally feel that translation is always a collaborative activity. Though collaborative translation talks about particular kind of partnership, particular kind of associations, I mean, several kinds of associations, but the moment a translator is there with another book, a point of collaboration begins. Even if we take it in the technical sense, collaborative translation, though the phrase is in coinage, in popular currency recently, this is not in itself a very new thing. I was just wondering, I went back to the translations that were happening in the Mughal period, like Akbar himself, he had a maktab khana where groups of translators would be working between Sanskrit and Persian. So, and similarly, even in the Renaissance, if we look at the West and the Renaissance translations, we see a lot of group activity, as we say in today's parlance, happening in those days as well. And translator as a lonely individual is probably comparatively newer as compared to the act of collaborative translation. We have very eminent translators here who have themselves translated several texts and who have also been part of several collaborative projects. So I will not take up more time, but I would now begin with the discussion. I can just start like this, and I move from the left, and we have with us Sri V. Ramaswamy, who's himself an eminent translator. And if we could kind of speak a bit about his experiences, or maybe collaborative translation in general a bit. Whatever.
Thank you. I began translating actually quite accidentally, out of the blue, in 2005. And in January 2020, again out of the blue, perhaps out of a whim, I sent a message to a Facebook friend of mine from Bangladesh, inquiring whether she would join me in translating a novella by Shohidul Johir of Bangladesh called Jibon o Rajnoitik Bastovata, or Life and Political Reality. So that was on a whim, out of the blue, and then as it transpired, I traveled to Dhaka the following month, and the plan was to sit together for about a week, and she would read and I would translate. But she wasn't able to devote all that time, so on some days she came and we did that, and on other days I worked on my own or with another young student friend of mine. So a first draft was completed through that, and then after I returned to Kolkata, COVID and lockdown and so on, so it was 6 months or so after my return that I picked it up, and I worked with my collaborator. Her name is Sharoza Naireen. We worked online via Google. The novel is about the genocide of 1971 in Bangladesh, and looking back at that genocide 15 years later, and memories of that genocide, memories that which don't die and which invade your current life as well. It's one, in the Bangla original, it's about 19,000 words. It is one single stream of consciousness paragraph. In English, it's about 22,000 words. So, you know, when you translate an important work like this one that we were doing, two is better than one. Two translators are better than one because straight away you have a plurality. More skills are brought to the table, more capabilities are brought. Perhaps Sharoza, being Bangladeshi, was closer to the text than I was, and there are subtle tones and connotations and so on that somebody in Bangladesh may be more quick to catch than someone like me. So for various reasons, it makes sense for two people to work rather than one, but also if you have the aspiration of being completely uncompromising in your effort and in your labor, and to leave no stone unturned, as it were, to do your very best, then that big responsibility can be shared between two people. It may be too much for one person to carry, and the person might lose perspective. But when there are two, then the load can be shared. So I remember I did the bulk of the labor, that is reading the text and translating it into English. So all the words on the first draft came through my pen. So I left it for her to do the subsequent more arduous labor of comparing the translation to the original very, very painstakingly. And we went through several rounds of that, and in each round we caught things that could be improved or which were incorrect, and so on. So when you want to devote a huge amount of effort, then it helps to have two people so that that labor is shared. And obviously the vocabulary and the linguistic universe of each person is different from any other person. So more words can flow. And Sharoza contributed a word, I remember, S-A-B-L-E, sable, which is a name for a particular shade of blue, a dark shade of blue. I can't remember what the original Bangla word was for which we used that. But that's an example. It wouldn't have come out of my head. But since there are two people, more enriching output is possible. I've had other collaborations too. I translated a non-fiction memoir called Goi Geramer Panchali. In English, I translated it to The Song of the Faraway Village by Ansaruddin. Ansaruddin is a marginal farmer from Nadia district, and he started writing at the age of 30. That's about 35 years ago. And he's well known for his novel called Go Rakhaler Kotha Kotha. And I had wanted to translate that, but I deferred it because I felt too exhausted after a lot of intensive translation. So for that book, I got Labani Jongi, who was a PhD scholar in Kolkata, to join me. And she was a kind of neighbor of the author, or Labani's father was a friend of the author, lived in the next village. So broadly, she was also from that rural background, from a neighboring village. I thought she would be familiar with the ethos and the milieu. The book is about, it's ethnographic in character. It's about Muslim life and milieu in rural Bengal. Rural Muslim life and milieu. I thought that was very interesting. I found it personally very interesting. And also in this socio-political juncture now, I thought it was apt. So I invited Labuni, but Labuni is also a very lively and creative personality, so she was more in the nature of a muse for me in that collaboration. So she would read and I would translate. We would sometimes discuss what we are working on. And she played, as I said, a muse-like figure for me. It was a difficult book to translate, a lot of persistence and patience needed. So her presence aided me in doing that. And finally, I translated a novel by Shaukat Ali of Bangladesh, an eminent writer of that country. A novel of his called Nadai or Lodai, translated in English as The Struggle. So it's about the beginnings of the Tebhaga Andolan in East Pakistan, which was subsequent to the movement in West Bengal in India. So I did that together with Mohiuddin Jahangir, who for his PhD he wrote a thesis on that author, Shaukat Ali. And so I invited him to join me. But his role was not so much of a collaborator or a co-translator as an interpreter of that text. So there is a lot of Ancholik Bhasha or regional speech or dialect speech in that book, and some other literary or spiritual or religious references and so on. So he acted as an interpreter. Finally, I'd like to say that all translations can benefit through collaboration. What our moderator began by saying all translations are collaboration, that is absolutely true. When you submit your manuscript to the publisher, the editor or the copy editor who works with you is also a close collaborator. One of the Shubhimal Mishra books that I translated called This Could Have Become Ramayan Chamar's Tale, the strong presence of Rahul Soni, the editor at HarperCollins. His role was very strong and creative and vital. And my work is done in translation and the copy editing is going on, but it was a very rich exchange as the proofs bounced back and forth between us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you brought in something very interesting, that two minds working together brings more to the table. And as we heard of his journey, so we have the collaborator in the role of someone who brings in more nuances in the language, like nuances with maybe the example that you gave of color, or it can be maybe something else as well. So also, I was quite intrigued by your selection of collaborators who are always the insiders from the community. So the community that we do not belong to, that kind of, which we are not familiar with, it's probably easier, or it makes translation much more faithful, if I may use the word, to to have a collaborator from that place. With that, I move to Nirmalda. Nirmalda himself has been is a translator, and he's also been working with several projects with bodies like Sahitya Academy and several others. So, would like to hear his experience.
Thank you, Nabanita. It was very interesting to listen to Mr. Ramaswamy's experience. His experiences are mainly focused on two translators working together, so that the deeper nuances of the language or certain regional expressions are not lost. if it is lost to one translator, it can be supplemented by the other translator. Let me move away to another facets of collaborative translation. I was thinking of collaborative translation in terms of also between the translator and the author at one stage. At another stage, between language and language, like-minded languages, like-minded, I mean languages springing out of the same source, for example, Bengali, Assamese and Odia, Maithili. Four languages can be brought together, writers of that languages, purported translators from that language into English or into Bengali, whatever may be the target sought after, and then having a workshop together for a few days with a reasonably good director or two co-directors who can give occasional inputs to move the translators and the writers together. Then there can be collaboration between the translator, author and the publisher also. And you mentioned the editor Rahul of HarperCollins. So it can be pre-planned. In your case, it came after you submitted the manuscript. But a collaborative translation can be pre-planned also between the translator, if the author is leaving, the living author. If the author is not leaving, then maybe the possible publishers, agents, or whatever. And the other personal experience I can tell you about my translation of Mahashweta Devi's Kabi Bandagati Gair Jivan Mrityu, Life and Death of poet Bandagati Gai. So Bandagati Gai was a Dalit poet. His level of aspiration was very high. He wanted to snap out of his local boundary, go to the king's court, be a court poet, but all this is not possible unless you are a Brahmin. So Mahashweta Devi found out that this guy, I am sure it is from a folk tale, from some folklores or from our own folkloristic researches, that this fellow was, by appearance, he looked more like a upper caste person. He did not exactly look like a Dalit. And he was really a great poet. I think a kind of a, born poet. So he moved away, walked miles together, reached the capital of the region in Mahishadal, 16th century, 17th century. And then he went to the court. He sought permission to recite some poems. He was granted permission and he introduced himself as a Brahmin, not as a Dalit. And then he rose to the rank gradually, ultimately became the court poet. And the princess fell in love with him and he was about to be married, all sorted out in his life. But it is at that point that tragedy happened. There was the death of the Sardar or the leader of the community, and then they wanted someone to succeed him, and he was one of the possible candidates, not his own candidature. His candidature was selected by the village people, and they started looking after him. Ultimately, some of the emissaries reached the king's court and demanded that he go back with them. And this is how he was exposed, his identity was exposed. Then he was hounded by the king's messengers and killers, one should say. He ultimately went to the jungle, took shelter near a Kalibadi. He was found out and killed. So that's the story. Now, while doing that story into English, actually I was doing it not by my own choice, but by Mahashweta Devi's personal desire. So I found many, as you said earlier, I found many of the expressions of the then Mahishadal of the Rad area, and many descriptions also, descriptions, particularly geographical descriptions, which were beyond me actually. It went over my head because I was not a researcher in the geography or history of the old time of Radhanchal. So I had to sit with her. So that is what I call collaborative translation between the author and the translator. I had to sit with her on many occasions. I used to read out the English portion wherever she felt that I have not been able to catch the nuance of the original, so she would guide me, and that is how ultimately I got the book done. There is another way of collaborative translation when you do not know the original language. So I translated from Kannada, I translated from Marathi, but you don't have to mistake me to be a polyglot. I don't know much languages. But I translated from Kannada, or you are Anantamurthy. Again, you know, Anantamurthy wanted some of his stories translated into Bengali. So I translated one story from an English collection. It was published by a magazine called Proma. It was edited by Shurojit Ghosh. I think that magazine no longer exists. Shurojit passed away. And Anantamurthy had a great friend in Nabanita Devsen. So Nabanita Devsen read that story and told Anantamurthy it's a very good translation. So after that, your Anantamurthy told me that why don't you translate some of my stories and bring out a volume. Now, such a great man, such a great writer, personally requesting you is something you have to do. I know it was a daunting task. So I had only one possible way, is a collaborative translation. Anantamurthy provided me with some rough English translation being prepared by one lady. It was sort of a manuscript, and I had a Hindi translation available with me. So with this Hindi and Hindi translation, rough Hindi translation, I did my English. And Ivar Anantamurthy at that time was the president of Sahitya Academy. So he used to come to Delhi almost every month. And every month I would go and sit with him in the India International Center, maybe at least 1 hour per day, something like that. And this is how ultimately I could manage to transfer the original meaning, original intention into Bengali, into English, sorry. And then this Marathi novel, Sahitya Academy award-winning novel, Jhada Jharti by Vishwas Patil. Again, Sahitya Academy wanted me to translate it into Bengali in Calcutta office. So Vishwas Patil was a friend. Again, I had a number of sittings with him. I used to jot down the words and sentences and certain backgrounds which I could not do while doing a chapter. And whenever I would go to Bombay or he would come to Delhi, I would sit with him and sort those out. So in my experience, in my personal experience, collaborative translation is collaboration between the translator and the author. In my institutional experience, I have organized a lot of translation workshops from Sahitya Academy, and in those workshops we used to do like this, the languages of a particular region, authors and translators coming together, some resource persons will be there, some guidelines will be there, and ultimately the product-oriented workshop resulting in a book after 6 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nirmalda. You've brought in the diverse aspects of collaborative translation, actually. And one of my very early experiences of collaborative translation, from which I feel personally I learned a lot, was one of the Sahitya Academy workshops that had happened. And it was on translation of certain folk tales which were already in Bangla, collected by Dr. Ramkumar Mukhopadhyay, and they were being translated into English. So there was somewhere dual level of translation as well, because all these folk tales were in various Indian languages. So I feel these workshops where several minds come together and work together on maybe different stories, they work on a different, they bring in a lot of collaborative ideas, they bring in a lot of different ideas, and I think it enriches both the participants as well as the facilitators in various ways. I'll move to Professor Anindya Purakayastha, and we know that you've also recently received the translator Charles Waller's grant for translation. So if you could share your experiences.
Thank you. Am I audible? Yeah. So I think I would begin on a different note, which is that every year nowadays we look into the newspaper reports about the Nobel Prize winners. And by now it is the norm to see that every year in physics or in chemistry or in other branches of science, we get to see that there are 3 or 4 participants who worked together and got the Nobel Prize. 4 or 3 got the Nobel Prize in physics. So that is taken as a normative example in the field of science and technology. But when it comes to literature or social sciences, mostly in literary practices, I occasionally get to hear from colleagues that when you write an academic paper or translate, it is assumed and the presupposition is that it would be done by a solo author or by a person who is an isolated translator. So I think there are enough scopes to understand in our field in translation and in academic writing in literature and cultural studies that there are immense possibilities. In fact, it is, as you rightly said, that it is already collaborative. So I believe that how can it be single-authored when we talk about interdisciplinarity, cross-culturality, etc. And listening to Deepa, the next room, just prior to this event, she was constantly talking about how many Kannada languages are there. So, and she doesn't have access to Northern Kannada language. She's only having command over the southern part of the Kannada language. So within our own state, we are not sure about our own vernacular because there are so many variations of that. So when we translate, say for example, someone writing in say, a language called Sershabadia language, or someone writing in the Kamtapuri, in Kuch Bihar region or in other places in southern Bengal. It definitely needs a team effort to translate that work into either into the English language or in other languages. So living in a plurilingual or culturally pluralized context, in a landscape of that, it is always necessary that we put our heads and hands together to write, to translate from so many languages, because when we talk about translation, we assume, and again, there is this expectancy that we are talking about the mainstream, quote-unquote mainstream, major languages. But in the Indian context, there are so many languages, even within our own state. And nowadays, it is good to see that we are talking about archives of endangered languages, quote-unquote peripheral languages coming to the mainstream. So when we talk about that, your experiment with the workshop is absolutely very important, because I don't think it is possible to do translation from all those languages without these workshop method. So that is one. The other thing was that in the Charles Waller's project, I was working on the Kallol poets. Now, the Kallol poets are so varied and they're not one, but although they are clubbed together as the Kallol group of poets, even all these noted names like Jibanananda, Nazrul, and others, they come within the larger category of the Kallol poets. Even Tagore also wrote some of his poems in the Kallol magazine. So while working on the Kallol poets, translating them, I realized that it's very difficult to single-handedly do justice to them. Even while writing a book on Nazrul, and I was translating some of his lines and some extracts from his poetic work, I had some argument with the editor, the Taylor and Francis editor, the kind of thing that Deepa was narrating, which is that the editor was insisting on literal translation, whereas I could see that in Nazrul there are many lines which cannot be literally translated, and this is something that we all encounter while we translate. So when you come to such a situation, when you stumble on a particular word and you realize that this cannot be translated verbatim, then you don't have an exact linguistic equivalence to that particular word, which is already embedded in a symbolic, mythic landscape. Then how do you do justice to that? There you have to make consultations with someone who knows about the religiosity of that or the mythic background of that. And the same is true with my current project of translating this small book of Shankho Ghosh called Shomosto Khoter Mukhe Poli, where I'm working with Liesl Skov, who was a visiting Fulbright scholar who came to Kolkata, who has a big fascination for Bangla. It's not that I decided to work with Liesl because she is a native speaker of the English language, but because she's very much interested in Bangla and Bengali poetry. And I also realized, I might be wrong, I don't know, that when it comes to translating poetry, group work is perhaps more necessary, because in some of the cases, Shankho Ghosh, for example, there are many words and lines which are so nuanced, and there's so much of subtleties in expressions and other things, symbolically so loaded, it's very difficult to do justice to all those words and expressions on my own. So I have to kind of lean on the help of others, do consultations, workshopping. So yes, for me it is always a conjunctive teamwork, if not collaborative. It's always a teamwork. Maybe some of the people remain invisible in the ultimate articulation of the translated work. There's always a teamwork while doing all these things.
So we generally hear of poetry as being a kind of solitary act, and we have a very different view from Professor Anindya Purakayastha, where he says that when you're particularly translating poetry, it's collaborations or kind of discussions is more important. But I guess that's something open to individual translators as well. But I also do agree with to you to a certain extent. Like from my last experience of translating a series of poems from Bangla into English, the original was by Trishna Boshak. So I would often consult with the author whether what I'm writing, and I wanted to consult more because not for whether it is standing as an English poem or not, but whether what I am saying is what the author wanted, the poet wanted to say or not. So that's what I was coming to, that's only possible if the poet is there, and we so often translate works where poem is not, poet or the author is no longer with us, like right now you are working with Shankho Ghosh's poet or poems or Kollol period. We are almost towards time. We still have around 10 minutes with us. So in that 10 minutes, I would just want your views quickly about, in a kind of plurilingual and very deeply multicultural landscape that we have in India, is it at all possible that a translation activity would be a solitary act and not a collaborative act? So 2 minutes, I'll start from the other end this time.
Right. For me personally, I think the task to do is to translate from one Indian language to another, one bhasha to another. I translated Subimal Misra from Bangla to English, and then a friend of mine, her mother translated it from my English translation into Malayalam. And then, I was born in a Tamil family, but it was what is called a Palakkad Tamil family. That means the Tamil speakers from Kerala. People from Tamil Nadu migrated to Kerala, and there was a transformation of their language. It was a kind of mixed language. So that is the linguistic heritage I inherited. And so I was privileged to understand a good part of Malayalam through that. So I sat with the Malayalam translator and she read out her Malayalam translation, and I had Shubhimal Mishra's Bangla original and my English translation in front. And so I could tell her that maybe this word should be this instead, or discuss particular nuances of meaning. And the end result was that the Malayalam translation was closer to the Bangla than the English had been. Obviously, when you are translating between two Indian languages, however distant those two languages may be, in most cases there is a subtle and underlying relationship also, whether through religion or mythology and so on. And sometimes the words themselves, the spelling or orthography or pronunciation of the word may be different, but it's the same word. For instance, the word Bhayankar in Bangla and Bayangaram in Malayalam, it's the same word, but the adjectives are used for different things. In Malayalam, it's not exactly the Bengali Bhayankar. They've transformed it to mean something different, meaning tremendous or terrible or awesome. They'll say Bayangaram. So my wish is to see a lot of Bhasha to Bhasha translation, and those will essentially be collaborative or team efforts. We need to identify people who are bilingual or multilingual, and in India, people are bilingual and multilingual naturally, just through their different backgrounds. Somebody may be a Telugu speaker, but her father works in the railways and she lives in Kharagpur, so she knows Telugu and Malayalam and Hindi and English. So this is very common across India. And there are, among all these bilingual and multilingual people, you'll have a good number who are literate, who are readers, who like to write and read and maybe translate. So with a little bit of search and indexing and preparing indexes of bilingual and multilingual people and scholars, we can put together teams and under workshops and so on. So a team of 3 people can translate from Uriya to Marathi, or from Assamese to Malayalam, and so on, with 1 or 2 people in between. And it can be done painstakingly so that there is no slip through the languages. If you translate from Bangla to English and somebody uses that English to translate to Marathi or Malayalam, it's 2 degrees of separation. Like in a Xerox copy, the copy loses resolution to some extent, and a copy of a copy loses even more resolution. So something similar happens in translation. So the presence of the original text is vital, and somebody who's reading and interpreting the original text needs to be in any team to translate it into any other language.
Nirmalda, your views quickly, in 2 minutes.
Well, nothing much to add with what I already told you regarding my idea of collaborative translation. But you had a question, no?
I was saying that whether it is at all possible to think of translation in isolation in a pluralistic landscape that we have in India.
That is a difficult question. I think it is possible. Contrary to the present day opinion, I think if writing is possible, on a singular front, then why translation should not be possible? And if you need any collaboration, if the author is alive, then he is the best source. You must know the author. If you don't know him, get acquainted to him or her, and take his or her help in understanding the nuances of certain areas which are dark to you. But as far as collaborative translation is concerned, if you are taking a classic and the author is no longer there, then multiple voices might help. Or you mentioned Kamtapuri language. I was also listening to Deepa Basis today. What Deepa said about the central Karnataka language and North Karnataka language, and what one particular lady wrote in a particular language which was not intelligible to her despite being a Karnataka. This situation does not prevail in Bengali. In Bengali there are dialects, but the written literature is of a particular standardized literature. So we don't have that big problem. But when you take such a project where all kind of ethnography and other things are involved and geopolitics is involved, then you need some resource persons from the area. And I'm sure individually this translation of Kamtapuri language or Rajbangshi literature cannot be done because we don't have any standardized literature there. So you need field work, you need workshops and other things. In my experience about the classics, what I was mentioning, when I was working with Sahitya Academy in Calcutta, we organized it was 600th birth anniversary of Mirza Ghalib, 600, 300, I'm forgetting, birth anniversary of Ghalib, and we decided to do a translation of Ghalib's, Diwan. It's called Diwan, it's collected ghazals, So we organized a workshop. Shankho Ghosh and Jyoti Prakash Chaki were the co-directors. And we invited all the leading poets, younger poets, maybe around 50s, including, I saw Choitali Chattopadhyay here. She was also one of the participants. And they all collaboratively translated the entire Diwan of Ghalib. And we published it, edited by Shankho Ghosh. So I think in such situations, you do not have any other alternative, and you have to go for collaborative translations. But otherwise, if you are translating from someone, as far as I am concerned, I will translate someone's writing which I love. So there I am already collaborating with him, soul to soul, So there I don't think I need any collaboration.
That's what I began with, that when the moment you're picking up a book, you're already collaborating with the existing author. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just very briefly, we don't have time, so I'll begin with one experience, which is that currently I'm also doing one translation of a late 18th century book with my colleague, Dr. Murshid Alam, which is the book called Gyan Sagar, written by someone called Ali Raja, or who was also known as Kanu Fakir. While working on that, on every line we stumble on different words and expressions which are not clear to us, so we are looking for a dictionary which would help us to understand those words. So when you translate Bengali work from the quote-unquote medieval period, because people would argue the message that the medieval can also be called early modern. So then you need a lot of expertise from different sources to work. So that is one concrete example. The other one, while agreeing with him, I'll slightly disagree because Deepa was also talking about decolonizing translation with an accent. So in today's context, there are enough scope to question this distinction between language and dialect. So what is considered as dialect today was language earlier. So I think the situation is same in all states of India, not just in Karnataka, but in Bengal as well. We don't have just Rajbangshi, we have so many languages which are so peripheralized and that we do not know anything about them. So when we talk about translation, we have to keep in mind all these languages. So yeah, it has to be teamwork. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All three of you have brought in a lot in terms of the diversity of languages and how collaborations work and how they happen. Also, India is, I would say, a kind of one of the richest sources, places where we have so many languages. And as you mentioned, the peripheral languages, one doesn't know when the language is in the periphery and when would it come in the center. So this constant movement between center and periphery is something that we need to keep in mind. And one of the things that I'm very happy that has happened in the field of language is that the word dialect is not more in currency anymore, because who decides which is a language and which is a dialect? So that's something I guess is very important. And we cannot do without collaborative translations in certain cases, as by now all of you have heard so much about. So with that, I would just end this session. Thank you so much for bringing